everyone, and welcome to the Inn with Dr. Tim. It's been some time since we've gotten back together. There's been this thing going on called the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also we moved our facility, the Physician Release Therapy Institute, to a new location. So we've been pretty preoccupied with that. But we are super psyched today to have Dr. Corey Anden back with us as a follow-up to our last podcast where we had Medical Cannabis 101. And so, in a way, today is kind of like the 102 piece to that talk. So, thanks, Dr. Anden, for agreeing to be with us today, and we sure appreciate your expertise in this area.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
Sure thing. And for those of you who didn't catch Dr. Anden's podcast last time, let me give you a little background about Dr. Anden. So Dr. Anden is a board certified physician that's been practicing medicine in Northern Utah for over the past 32 years, using a whole person approach and a non-surgical treatment options. She now runs a new company, Human Nature Medical, and we'll give you some links to that, and so that you can connect with her, and also you can find her on social media and also the internet via CoreyAndenMD.com. Now, Dr. Ann's mission has been to help patients heal and cope with their chronic injuries, pain, and musculoskeletal disorders by really combining education, lifestyle counseling, and conventional alternative treatment strategies. She's been a trailblazer, particularly for female physicians in Utah and also medical cannabis. Dr. Anden grew up outside Pittsburgh, PA. She graduated from Pittsburgh School of Medicine in 1984 with her medical degree and honors in orthopedic surgery, neurology, and psychiatry. She moved to Utah in 1988 for the greatest snow on earth, and we hope it stays that way with the new
Hope
season
so.
coming up here, and started her own private practice. In March 2019, Dr. Ann was the first physician in Utah to open her doors to new and hopeful medical cannabis patients. And she has been an advocate through her career and was actually waiting the day when medical cannabis would come to Utah. So it has now arrived here in Utah and also really across the nation and world, and is being more readily recognized and widely accepted as a medical alternative for many patients. In fact, she's such an advocate and eager to learn more that she recently has been involved in a program at the University of Maryland and has gained a great deal of knowledge from their program, and that's in cannabis and therapeutics. Dr. Anderson, however, is very knowledgeable in the dosing parameters and the entourage system, is very comfortable with recommending medical cannabis for patients of all ages, demographics, and levels of experience. So, where we take off today is really we talked about how medical cannabis came about, how it went from the marijuana days way back when, and we made it illegal, and then it started to become legal, and then all the benefits that we have observed and seen in both in research and also clinical practice for medical cannabis. But the question was, and I think we ended with, we just didn't have time to say, well, how does it do that? How does medical cannabis decrease pain, inflammation, and all these other wonderful things that we know medical cannabis does for patients? And so today, we're going to dive in a bit to what's known as the Endocannabinoid System, or what's also abbreviated often as ECS. So you'll hear us talking ECS, and if we're talking about ECS, we're talking about that system. And just so you have a sense, this system was discovered over 30 years ago. I mean, this is not actually new knowledge. It's often not been talked about, but it's quite often new knowledge to many practitioners, and it really became new to me as I got into researching medical cannabis and got into conversations with Dr. Anden, that this system is pretty amazing. And it's sort of on par with our central nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, other systems we have that we study in medicine and we utilize in medicine. But let's talk about it, I guess. I guess maybe you can just explain to us, Dr. Anden, like, what is the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS system?
Yes, thank you, Tim. So the endocannabinoid system was discovered, as you said, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So that was about the time I was actually finishing my residency training. So it wasn't known for me during medical school, but subsequent physicians maybe could be aware of it. Most of the research was done in Israel because the way it was discovered was studying the plant chemicals from the cannabis plant
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to understand how they interacted in the human body. So where that research was primarily being done was in Israel because it was still illegal pretty much for research to study in the United States other than plants grown at the University of Mississippi. So that was those were the scientists at the forefront of this.
Okay.
So studying the plant chemicals, it was found that they bound to receptors in the human body. They expected, I believe, to find just receptors in the brain because of the associated major cannabis effect, thinking that it was the psychoactive or the intoxicating effect. But as they discovered more chemicals in the cannabis plant, they found that they linked to lots of different receptors all over the human body. So then this was named the endocannabinoid system, meaning endo in the body, as opposed to, and then those chemicals were called endocannabinoids,
Hmm.
as opposed to the plant chemicals, which are called phytocannabinoids, PHYTO. So they're chemically very similar and interact in the body and facilitate that research. So that
So cannabis helped really to identify, as I'm hearing, it helped identify that we have this system. Like it was innate in our body already. Like we don't need we don't need medical cannabis to have the system or activate it, but it's already there. Is that correct?
correct, but they wouldn't have discovered it without the plant chemicals because
Okay. Hmm.
it's a system different from the nervous system or the cardiovascular system where you have large organs and identifiable without microscopes. You know, identifiable with the naked eye. We have these symptoms,
Hmm.
these systems. Here are nerves. Here's a heart. Here's lungs. So the endocannabinoid system is really at the cellular level. So these are receptors on actual cells. So the cells are the building blocks of those organs. So not really visible to the naked eye, but more to be studied on a chemical and microscopic level.
Would it be, I guess, would it be similar? I guess the analog could be our opiate system or an endogenous opiate system, where we have these receptors that sort of kind of take up our pain relieving chemicals known as opiates, endogenous opiates. Would that be sort of a similar system? Would that be
Sure, but
analogous?
I don't think we call it an opioid system. We just
Hmm.
call it we have opioid receptors.
Opioid receptors, yeah. Okay, so we have cannabinoid receptors
We have
too.
cannabinoid receptors, but the endocannabinoid system is more than the receptors, though.
Hmm.
So there's really described three components.
Okay.
So we have the receptors, we have the chemicals that bind to those receptors, called
Mhm.
the endocannabinoids, or the plant chemicals also bind to them, so the phytocannabinoids. And then we have the enzymes that manufacture those chemicals and also break them down
Mhm.
when they're no longer necessary.
So, I guess in your opinion, what do we need this system for? Like, how's it helpful to us to have?
Yeah, it's very important. It's really the system that oversees all of the other systems to create balance, and the term we use, homeostasis, which is balance. So the endocannabinoid system is really the central mechanism that modulates the function of all of the other systems. So basically, if something's out of sync, something's too high or something's too low, say hormones or um, just the way the body's working, the physiology of the gastrointestinal tract maybe isn't quite doing what it's supposed to do, or our immune system
Mhm.
is being barraged, or we have overactive immune systems or underactive immune systems, which is a topic of consideration these days with the COVID
Right,
19.
right.
Then the endocannabinoid system works to modulate and regulate those systems to bring them back into proper function.
Okay, so sort of like if you had a big stereo system and you had a volume knob, the ECS system is kind of the volume knob, turning the volume up or down of these different
Yeah,
systems and kind of modulating them, I guess.
sure, volume as well
Yeah.
as yeah, bass and treble and all of those other things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
makes them all play like an orchestra, I guess, basically all those instruments coming
yes.
through our stereo.
So
So
that would be nice.
are there certain things that we know that regular that are primary to the ECS system? Like, what are the things that maybe the ECS system that our listeners would recognize that it regulates? Like things that it does. Does it regulate sleep or mood or pain and things of that nature?
So there are receptors distributed widely through the body.
Mm-hmm.
Many are in the central nervous system, so the brain and spinal cord, and that's what we most associate the endocannabinoid system, but of course
Mm-hmm.
it's more than that. So, in the way the receptors and the chemicals interact in the brain, it influences mood and memory, cognition.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be very helpful in modulating symptoms of anxiety, depression, PTSD, also seizure disorders, uh, Alzheimer's,
It
cognitive decline.
Yeah. It sounds like a miracle system. It sounds pretty wild. And now you had shared some research articles with me, and also I looked at some little pictures and things of that nature. So it might be a good time to share this with our listeners. Now, those who are just listening, of course, you might not be able to see these, but what I'll try to do is we'll try to put these up as resources for you that you can link to this. I guess, receptor system, and that these receptors are located in different areas of the body. Can you explain this Cb1, Cb2 thing that people are going to see and maybe hear about with this system?
Sure, if people are interested and they start Googling the ECS, it will definitely come up with slides that talk about Cb1 and Cb2 receptors. So these are the receptor part of the three-part endocannabinoid system. So Cb stands for cannabinoid. So cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2 receptors.
Mm-hmm.
And these are considered part of the classical endocannabinoid system because these were what were first discovered. But since then, we now know that there's quite an expanded endocannabinoid system with many other receptors involved directly and indirectly in the system. So the Cb1 receptors are located primarily in the brain and central nervous system, but as you can see, they're also in the cardiovascular, pulmonary, musculoskeletal, gastrointestinal system, even the reproductive organs, and in the bone marrow. So that means that when the endocannabinoids are reacting with Cb1 receptors, there's going to be influence on many of those different systems, and they sort of seem totally unrelated, but as we know, our body's very complicated and these systems do interact and influence each other. So for example, I alluded to or discussed the brain and central nervous system, but as far as the gastrointestinal tract goes, the endocannabinoid system can regulate abdominal and treat influence symptoms such as abdominal pain, irritable bowel syndrome, autoimmune disorders of the GI tract, nausea, vomiting, etc. It can regulate reproductive function, fertility, infertility, bone marrow, meaning helps our bones to store calcium and also to make bone marrow products for the immune system.
Well, I mean, to me, I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm like, it seems like our entire body that we have these receptors in. And I'm just thinking, because we're in sort of a crazy land about inflammation and viruses and things of that nature and impacting our immune systems. I would imagine that if something goes a little awry with this system, it's really impacting our entire body and maybe our ability to fight, illness.
Yes, that is correct. So it's now thought that many disorders, aside from the current virus infections, that autoimmune disorders or people who are more susceptible to infections may have dysfunction in their endocannabinoid system, which makes them more vulnerable. So right now we're talking about with the virus, the inflammation that occurs. Of course, we want our body to mount an inflammatory response to the virus, but we don't want a magnified inflammatory response. So the endocannabinoid system helps to regulate that. You know, we talk about the cytokine storm that
Mm,
people have, and recent research is talking about the endocannabinoid system having a pivotal role in modulating the amount of response, the actual immune response, that it's on target, not too little, not too much.
right. And so, as you've seen, I just put up an image, sort of a neuron and its role with, the immune system. And as we can see here, the CB2 receptors, um, you know, kind of take up some of those I'm sorry, the cannabinoids, cannabinoids. And I'm just curious, when they do that, Dr. Anden, when the immune cells receive that cannabinoid, how does, how's it theorized? How's it, I guess, talked about in research and others? How's it impact that immune cell? I mean, how's it really help us in regards to maybe, our immune response? I'm just curious.
Well, the body perceives a threat
Hmm.
as a virus or an autoimmune dysfunction, and then it regulates the function of the immune cells to cause more of certain cells to be produced, or stop the production of certain cells and their reaction on the target tissues.
And I would imagine, because our immune system, it sort of responds to a threat, whether that be COVID-19, bronchitis, you've broken your leg, you have a systemic sepsis infection. Um, you know, with the immune process, and my understanding is that it's really meant to sort of create an environment where it's going to fight that attacker, I guess you would say, and or that issue that's causing inflammation, and really kind of engulf it. And for those who may have heard this term, often when we have an infection, we release what's known as macrophages. They're like little Pac-Mans that go around and eat up things that should not be there. And so I would imagine, and what we've seen in research, that if we have a pretty robust attack on our systems or system, that we want a really strong immune response. And my sense of it is that if our ECS system's working well, that we can mount a stronger immune response. Is that really a fair assumption, would you say?
Yes, that is correct. We talk about having good endocannabinoid system tone. Just like when you work out and you want to have a fit body
Mm-hmm.
and you exercise your brain and you have good cognitive powers, we want to have a very strong endocannabinoid system. Uh, However, our modern society and our lifestyles tend to keep our endocannabinoid system not functioning the best.
Hmm.
So there may be people who are more susceptible to infections because they're just generally not healthy, and that means their endocannabinoid system isn't healthy. So we see
Yeah.
with certain infections, there are people who are more vulnerable to that. People who have diabetes, for example. Diabetes is thought of as a chronic inflammatory process. So their body is 24/7 fighting inflammation throughout the body. So that's depleting the reserves of the immune system. Uh, so, the endocannabinoid system, the immune system are already at kind of,
Yeah.
no frontline defense mechanism.
They sound pretty overwhelmed. And I would imagine chronic pain is similar, in the sense that chronic pain kind of overwhelms the system and creates, this chronic inflammatory response. And so I know that that's an area of your expertise, chronic pain, and obviously it is mine as well, but more on a therapeutic therapy side of things. So can you kind of discuss a little bit for our listeners and viewers, like how is it that we can leverage? How is it we can leverage? How can we maximize our ECS system um, to really help us fight pain, chronic inflammation, and maybe where does cannabis kind of come into that process? I'm just curious your opinion on that.
So when we talk about chronic pain, we don't necessarily have to have inflammation.
Okay.
So the definition of pain is a physical as well as psychological uh, perception of something that hurts,
Right.
right? That we perceive as discomfort and undesirable.
Hmm.
Inflammation is something we can measure.
Hmm.
We can see that a tissue is inflamed, red hot, swollen, or they're at a microscopic level, there's inflammation. So people can have pain without inflammation. I suppose
Hmm.
people can even have inflammation without pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Would that
Diabetes
be
is a chronic inflammatory process where people aren't
right?
necessarily complaining of pain.
And I seem to
So,
remember too, just to kind of piggyback off your comment there, that even those who have type 2 diabetes or those, like, for example, those who are really overweight or obese, that they actually are producing inflammatory cells, but they're not necessarily feeling pain, but because they're overweight and because of the sort of the imbalance in their systems, that they're just really just producing inflammatory cells. Is that correct? Am I
correct.
thinking correct in
Well,
that?
there's chronic inflammation just feeding on itself
Hmm.
with, yeah,
Okay.
as you mean.
So you've got chronic inflammation, possibly with or without pain. We know it's taxing our ECS system, probably not making us very healthy and not really setting up us to fight inflammation, to fight viruses and bacteria and all kinds of things. Where does the THC piece or the medical cannabis piece come in to the ECS system? Because it seems to be inherently tied to that system.
So the plant phytochemicals are very similar to the body phytochemical or the body endocannabinoids. So the THC, which is technically delta 9 THC, is very similar to the endocannabinoid anandamide, which prefers to bind to the Cb1 receptors, which is the central nervous system,
Mhm.
brain, spinal cord. But we saw all those other
Yeah,
systems.
yeah. I think I have a
So,
picture of this system. So, for what you're talking about. So you keep chatting. I'm going to see if I can pull
okay.
that up for people.
Okay, so when the body produces endocannabinoids, they're produced on demand and transiently. So they don't circulate through the body per se, they stay in the organ system in which they have been stimulated to be produced. So they're produced at what we call the presynaptic and interact at the postsynaptic and back and forth
Mhm.
membranes there. But they're only present for a short period of time as needed. So when we have the plant cannabinoids, delta 9 THC, it comes and it binds, it gets into the body by some mechanism that then gets it into the bloodstream. So it's being taken all over the body to multiple different organ systems simultaneously to have effects.
Yeah, and I put up a little picture here, compliments of a research study that we were looking at, and I'll provide the source here at the end of the show. But as you see the presynaptic terminal, that's kind of like a neuron that lets little neurotransmitters out, kind of like gasolines to fire up the other transmitter that receives it. So kind of goes in there. But from my understanding, this ENS system is super unique that it has kind of what's called retrograde signaling. Um, it's very analogous to like if you have your leaky pipe, right? So you want to actually stop the water before it hits the sink or hits the floor, to be better said. So we're going to turn off the faucet to keep it from letting out the water onto the floor, which could be analogous to this postsynaptic neuron that we see here that's going to receive it. So my understanding is that THC really kind of binds in to that receptor Cb1, Cb2, and really inhibits the release for example, this glutamate here that we see, that's like the gas, the water that essentially fuels pain. Um, GABA being more in the brain, and so would that be I guess a, I guess to expand off your explanation, is that what we're seeing here in this sort of diagram?
Yeah, so it's a good explanation, but
Mm-hmm.
it becomes more complicated because it can turn on and also turn off because we're trying to create that balance, that homeostasis. So
Mm-hmm.
depending on the perceived needs or threat, it modulates.
Okay.
THC modulates that. And
Now,
then,
mhm.
go ahead.
That just kind of brought up a question in my mind. Um, if we're putting a lot of THC into the system, are we, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Are we sort of disabling the system to function normally, kind of limiting its ability to react normally? Kind of like in a way we've heard about steroids, like, or hormones. If you take them, you take them, then your body loses that natural ability. Does that occur at all? Is that a problem? Is something that we should be concerned about with the use of, say, medical cannabis for this function?
Well, it's dose dependent. So this is plant-based medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and when we're talking about the cannabis plant, we're not just talking about THC. So I'm a fan of whole plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning that there are more than 500 chemicals, and delta 9 THC and CBD, cannabidiol are just two of those. So we're sort of switching over from the endocannabinoid system to other chemicals that
Mm-hmm.
react with it.
Yeah.
So then it becomes dose dependent. So what I'm finding is people who have a really good functioning endocannabinoid system, they have good
Mm-hmm.
endocannabinoid system tone, they really benefit from microdosing,
Oh,
very
okay.
low doses of THC. That's the main one that we measure,
Mm-hmm.
but very low doses of whole plant cannabinoids, terpenes, etc. So it appears that people who have an endocannabinoid dysfunction, now that could be a deficiency, or that could be an overstimulated endocannabinoid system, may require different doses of certain of the plant chemicals. So one interesting thing is that people who have PTSD
Mm-hmm.
seem to require very high doses of THC relative to someone who just has nausea, per se. So, what that means is the endocannabinoid system in the brain, particularly the amygdala, hippocampus areas where memories are stored,
Mm-hmm.
is not working very well at all, uh, due to, for whatever reason, physical, psychological trauma. There's a dysfunction.
Right.
So higher levels of THC seem to be what they require. That's what I've read in literature, and I have seen that in my clinical practice as I query people about their preferences with the cannabis. So that's very interesting. And the way that works in that area is that that amount of THC actually helps people to forget. We talk about um, loss of short-term memory or long-term memory related to
Mm-hmm.
cannabis as a bad thing. But
Yeah.
when you have a condition where you have too many memories,
Mm.
then it actually helps to decrease that, for example. Now, other people do better with very small doses of THC and higher doses of other plant cannabinoids, depending on how it works in the system. So, as with plant-based medicine, different from pharmaceutical medicine, it's very personalized, and it takes some experimentation, hopefully with someone who has some clinical understanding of the endocannabinoid system and how it works.
Right.
A clinician trained in that area to help sort through the details, because the way our culture is right now, people think it's always about high THC, and that's not true at all.
And I think, in our last talk, you had mentioned something very profound to me. So, as a physician who evaluates patients and prescribes THC or for THC administration or medical cannabis, um, getting the dosage just right or the strain just right, and coupled with that is pretty darn important. And that one of the things you said to me kind of struck home was, if you're getting high, you're probably all the time, if you're getting high with a medical cannabis, it's probably not the right dosage. And if you feel nothing and you don't have any improvement in your condition, your dosage probably is not correct either. Um, that's probably a really gross paraphrase of what you said.
That's simplifying it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
But essentially,
simplifying it quite a bit because you have
yeah.
to know what the underlying condition is. What is it that we want to treat?
Right.
What does clinical research suggest as a good combination of those chemicals?
Hmm.
Um, and tailoring the medicine to the condition.
Right.
So I wouldn't say getting high isn't bad. Getting high all the time
Hmm.
is bad. That might imply too much THC, and
Okay.
when you overwhelm the endocannabinoid system with too much THC,
Hmm.
then all those little receptors that we were talking about respond in a way such that they decrease the quantity of them that there are.
Okay.
So,
So there's
so
less
that we call that
so
down regulation. So
okay.
I describe it like this. So we have a nice, beautiful day. We have lots of windows, and the windows and doors are open, and we have a light breeze coming, and it's all very pleasant. But when
Hmm.
you overwhelm too much wind, like a hurricane, coming through those windows and doors, what do? We board up those windows and doors. So that's what the endocannabinoid system does. So it actually decreases the number of receptors
Hmm.
that are available. So that also then is an endocannabinoid dysfunction
Right.
because now we don't have enough receptors to handle other stressors. You know.
Well, and what strikes home to me is now there's this awareness that going to just get your medical card and have no direction, no evaluation, no dosage sort of modification based on your symptoms and how you're doing and your condition, it sounds like it'd be probably hit or miss, and you could potentially overwhelm your ECS system and really maybe not be as effective in the use of that system, but also the use of medical cannabis. Is that a fair, I guess, statement?
Well, that's a fair assumption. This is what I see with patients. So we have our people who are long-term cannabis users, and they, think that they're very knowledgeable about cannabis and using
Mm-hmm.
cannabis, and seem to perceive that it is all about getting high, uh, and and it is all about the THC content.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those people require a different sort of education, but again, they already think they know what they know.
Sure.
And so now we have to undo some perceptions and learning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people who've never used cannabis before, who are beginners, that's lovely because I present this
Yeah.
this sort of education
Sure.
about
Sure.
it, and then they understand from the get-go that we're going to start low and go slow, and we're going to use some combination of chemicals and bring that in because a lot of new people, their their understanding is they don't want to get high.
Right.
They don't want to have the intoxicating. That's the fear factor.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's really not that type. It's not like an alcohol intoxication. It's not a psychedelic experience. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a thoughtfulness. A different way
Mm-hmm.
of thinking. So it's easier when people understand how it works and the difference between plant-based medicine and pharmaceutical medicine, and that there is an endocannabinoid system, and this is how these chemicals influence and work in it. And then people are like, oh, okay. So then I can give them direction on what products to purchase. Stay away from the very high THC products.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there is a market for that based on um, just the common knowledge, which isn't really the correct perception as
Mm-hmm.
we know it now scientifically, more about the endocannabinoid system and the plant chemicals.
Well, with that fear that patients have, and for many it's a real fear, but based on their job. It happened yesterday. I had said to a patient, hey, I really think you should maybe go talk to Dr. Corey Anden, and I think medical marijuana might be a really good option for you based on their symptoms and chronic pain and so forth. And they said, well, I can't do that. I'll get fired. I'll get fired if I get a positive drug test. And this was a contractor for the US government, and which I found out later. And then I said, well, what about CBD? And he said, oh no, we're not permitted to take CBD either. Because I believe, based on some fear, a lot of people end up going the route of just CBD. That's pretty commonly sold now in most health avenues and markets. So, is there a difference? Maybe you can explain, how potentially maybe the ECS system could be impacted with CBD, maybe not. Why some individuals might be beneficial to go a certain way or combine, or is there a magic potion between CBD and THC for ECS system? I mean, I don't know. I've seen some different opinions on that, and I'm curious about yours.
So there's more than 500 chemicals in the cannabis plant. So you're talking about THC and CBD. So my other analogy for that is that's like talking about Tom Brady and Ron Gronkowski. Okay, so that's two chemicals or two players in the whole NFL. So if we just had the two of them or just one of them, we'd be very bored looking at them playing football, right?
Yeah.
So we just don't have just THC and CBD. We have the whole AFC, NFC, the whole NFL, and that's what makes
Right.
it interesting, all those players interacting together.
Right.
So we only target THC because the government decided to regulate that, and that, of course, increases the interest in that chemical. So that chemical at very low doses is anti-inflammatory, analgesic, anti-pain, treats nausea, vomiting, it's relaxing, calming, all of those sorts of things. As you get to a higher dose or a dose that overwhelms a particular personalized endocannabinoid system, then we can have more intoxicating effects. But people need to understand you can take THC in certain doses and it's not intoxicating. It's like ibuprofen.
Mm.
So CBD interacts with the endocannabinoid system different than the delta 9 THC. So we're still studying CBD. CBD interacts with a lot of different receptors, but it doesn't directly bind to Cb1 or Cb2 receptors. It more acts on the enzymes that degrade our endocannabinoids, like the anandamide,
Okay.
for example. It interacts with the enzyme that degrades anandamide, so it increases anandamide levels, but it also interacts with other receptors that are involved in pain modulation and such. So when we talk about a product, we're not talking about just THC or just CBD. You can have products that are an isolate, they're just THC or they're just CBD without, so they're just Tom Brady and just Ron Gronkowski. Okay, you don't have the whole system. And what we know, when you have an isolate, you require 10 times the dosing.
Oh, okay.
And anytime you have more dosing of one chemical, what do we have? Side effects,
Toxicity, I would imagine. Yeah.
toxicity. So there are studies on Epidiolex. For example, people say, oh, you can't take CBD, it elevates liver enzymes. Well, we're talking about Epidiolex that is basically a CBD isolate. It's plant derived, but it's only CBD. And the doses that they talk about are 300 to 600 milligrams once or twice a day. So people take whole plant cannabis that has a CBD product and is called whole plant or full spectrum, and the dose is more like 30 milligrams, right? So we're not going to have elevated liver
Okay.
enzymes. We're not going to have those side effects. So we have to be careful what we're talking about. Now,
Okay.
with the whole plant products, so CBD that I carry and recommend to patients, it's whole plant, which means by regulation under the Farm Bill, it can have less than 0.3% THC. So it still has some THC because you still need a little bit of Tom Brady in there,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it has a little bit. So, and of obviously THC products that
Yeah.
have full spectrum have more than 0.3% THC, more like
Yeah.
20% THC. So on a drug test, because that was your original question, and a person who is employed. So depending on the sensitivity of the drug test, even if they're taking CBD that has less than 0.3% THC, which I can guarantee you has no impairing effects,
Hmm.
They could test positive. So it begets the question: what are we checking? Are we checking that someone's taking cannabis or not taking cannabis, or they're impaired or not impaired? The question should be impairment. The question shouldn't be, are they taking this medicine or that medicine, right? Just as if people have a glass of wine at dinner or they take Ambien at night, if okay, that's okay as long as they're competent at work the next day,
Right.
right? So a lot of companies that have federal contracts are still, because it's still federally illegal, they're not letting their people use cannabis. Now, how can they get around that? Well, they can decide what they want to test for on a drug test. They don't have to test for the metabolites of THC.
Mm.
I if I was having a company, I would rather want to check and see if they have alcohol in their system, right?
Or
I
they're
don't want to say
impaired
they're
in some
drunk
way,
at
right?
work,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So the thing is, a lot of those chemicals that you can test for, they when you take them, they're in your system, for 24, hours or 48 hours maybe, or even less. Our body holds on to the phytocannabinoids. The phytocannabinoids are stored in our fat. Now, we can decide why that is. It sounds like our body really likes that, and it's keeping it for a rainy day.
Yeah.
So it stores it. So one may excrete the metabolites of THC for 2 weeks,
Mm.
3 weeks, depending on your metabolism. If a person is more heavy and has more body fat, they may store more and therefore they may excrete more. So it really
Mhm.
doesn't have to do with when you took the THC. Like I could have taken CBD, a week ago and I could still test positive for it.
Mm.
So, first of all, the substance is not impairing. There's a
Right.
tiny
Right.
amount of THC. Your body stores it, and now you have this test. So, we are definitely not testing impairment. So, it's just illogical as to why this is an issue. We should be testing
Yeah.
competency, not whether you test positive for a metabolite of cannabis.
Well, it kind of goes part and parcel, I think, with maybe our culture or society here in the US, sort of pharmacological, I guess, lens and perspective that anything is a bad thing, right? No matter how much it is. And we see that, sort of playing out today a little bit, even in our approach to these pandemics and these different viruses that are impacting our society, kind of an all or nothing kind of thing. And maybe that's the same thing when it comes to testing. Is an all or nothing thing. Like you could have very, very minuscule amounts that happened weeks ago, and you're not impaired, but still, you're held liable for being impaired, but you're really not impaired. So it's kind of like the testing thing with COVID. Like, you may have it, but we're not going to test you for it. We don't know if you're impaired or in the sense of
Right, right.
infected,
It's
but we're
kind
just
of a good. It's
assuming you
kind of
are.
we're making a lot of
Assumptions.
assumptions, and the thing is based on the current and the science that we've had really for 20 years or more. These drug laws should have been changed.
Well,
So many states have legalized
yeah.
cannabis. Why the federal government doesn't? If they just legalize it, all of this layer of complexity would go away. So
Well,
in
yeah.
Utah, for example, because cannabis is legal by the state,
Hmm.
if you work for the state of Utah, you're allowed to be using
Oh,
cannabis.
really? Okay.
Yeah, if you're a
Well,
school teacher, maybe not a bus driver because you have CDL license, issues
right.
there. But if you work for, the city of South Ogden or like, you are allowed to use cannabis as medicine.
Mhm. Well, that's a big discussion that I think we're opening a door to is the politics, potentially behind, not really paying attention to the research. You know,
Well, it becomes discriminatory then.
what do you mean by that?
Meaning that your wife is a school teacher, you could use cannabis, but you're a subcontractor at Hill Air Force Base and you can't use cannabis.
Hmm.
I'm
Or
saying because of federal,
right.
so it's discriminatory on your ability to use the medicine based on
Hmm.
your employer. So,
Right.
it's been in the news now. Amazon and Google are not testing people for, cannabis anymore. So,
Well, you brought forth an analogy with the football piece, and I'll just kind of recircle back to that because I think it's an important point, um, that we need to be careful of looking at these compounds in isolation, particularly in their ability to affect the ECS system. Very, I guess, analogous again that we don't want Tom Brady trying to win against the entire Raven football team on the field, right? He has to
right.
work a lot harder,
Yes.
doesn't he? And more than likely, he's not going to be as successful, right? If he
Right.
had had his entire team with him kind of working against or trying to overcome the Ravens, and so
Right.
as you can tell,
Right.
Ravens are my home team.
Okay.
So I got
Yes.
to throw that
Yes.
out there.
Yes.
But uh so with that, I mean, I think you've brought forth a couple really key primary messages here. One, we really should be utilizing whole plant medicine, not just one little isolate. Second, there's a lot we don't know. We don't know yet how CBD is really interacting fully, but it appears to be working and helping our ECS system. And then finally, you know, there might be dysregulation. There might be problems with our ACS system. And so with that, I have seen some literature, and there was an editorial in Nature, I believe it was, regarding maybe those who are susceptible to infection or illness, their ECS system is not in good shape. It's something's wrong with it. So, as a physician yourself, and when I have patients come in as a therapist, it just sometimes seems like people are all out of whack. I mean, I know that's a very broad and
No,
general
it's
term, but
true.
like a lot of their stuff I just can't explain because just all their systems seem just to be like out of balance. And so as a physician, when you are kind of evaluating, is someone maybe their system, their ECS system is not working well? I'm just curious, how do you come about maybe that assessment? Because I see it being talked about a fair amount in the literature now.
Well, we don't have a blood test for that because, as we said, the endocannabinoids that are produced are
Mm-hmm.
transiently produced in that synaptic system. So they're not really flowing through the blood that we can check on a blood test or urine test, and they react depending on the stressors.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really more of a clinical assessment. I've gotten to this point in my 32 years of medicine that I respect my talents as a physician, as a healer, to
Mm-hmm.
make a global perception.
Sure.
When everything's hurting or every joint has degenerative changes,
Mm-hmm.
there's something not quite right at a systems level,
Mm-hmm.
probably at a lifestyle level, and that sort of thing. So, insofar as cannabis has been used as medicine for 6,000 years safely, there's no lethal doses of it. And based on my understanding and knowledge, I'm going to conclude that there is definitely a problem with the endocannabinoid system
Right,
in
right.
those people.
Sure.
There's also a problem with the musculoskeletal system, the neurological
Mm.
system, the cardiovascular system, but the endocannabinoid system oversees all of that.
Well,
And
if that,
the 6,000 years of
yeah.
medicine says that before we had pharmaceuticals developed in like the 1930s,
Mhm.
plant-based medicine was good at treating a lot of those things. So
Well, if
let's just try some cannabis because we don't really have anything to lose.
right. Well, it brings up, and we have limited time here to kind of get into this, but it just makes me wonder, why aren't we talking about the utilization of plant-based medicine? And I'm not just saying cannabis, because there's other plants that treat illnesses. There's this whole COVID-19 thing going on, and my I guess my gut kind of tells me like we should have strong immune systems, right? We should
Right.
try to be building our immune systems to be as strong as we can have them to fight COVID-19, to fight the next pandemic, to fight the next illness, to fight whatever. So I'm just perplexed a little bit. Like, why is there really no talk about the immune system? There's no
Well,
talk about like building our immune system and what we can do to do that. I know that we can do it through vaccines, and vaccines are super helpful for those who are at risk. They really need it. But for all the rest of us who are just trying to kind of like make sure we have the best defenses, how would you say we boost our ECS system or boost our immune system? It's made
yeah, sure.
recommendations from you have really just been in this field for the last 32 years.
Well, your first part, I also question why we are not being bombarded with information on how to improve our natural immunity. It's as if we've given up on our bodies, that our bodies cannot fight infection. That everything has to be technologically engineered to fight immunity. No, we definitely should be talking about enhancing our natural immunity. So that would include enhancing our endocannabinoid system. But there are also other supplements. Vitamin D and zinc has been linked to improved immunity, and there are research papers that will say that most of the people, high number, more than 80, 90, I don't know exact number, of people who are critically ill and likely to not survive
Mm-hmm.
COVID infection are vitamin D deficient.
That's
So
amazing.
there are quite a bit of studies on that. So I would say that it's possible that regular cannabis users, if used properly medicinally, would have an enhanced natural immunity.
Possibly
So,
even maybe to COVID. Who knows?
well, I
And
mean, well, it's
yeah,
cannabis has antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral effects, and
and
anti-tumor
right,
effect.
right. When I and I think
It causes cancer cells, tumors to implode.
sure.
Apoptosis. So maybe it does the same thing with
Hmm.
other types of overwhelming overgrowth
Hmm.
type of processes in the body. So how can we enhance the endocannabinoid system?
Right. How can we boost
So
it?
well, it's the usual suspects. We need
Okay.
to have a natural, plant-based, healthy diet,
Okay.
not artificial foods. We should surround ourselves with things of nature. So, fresh air, getting outside in the outdoors. We should engage in pleasurable, healthy activities like yoga, dancing, singing, um, just feel good using our body, so it doesn't necessarily have to be working out at a gym, but just staying active and staying present.
Hmm.
There are some studies that suggest that cold immersion can stimulate the endocannabinoid
Right.
system. So I personally have been, I'm not a fan of cold water, but I've sort of been making myself go into cold water, and you
Yeah.
have some cryotherapy
Yeah.
equipment in your facility, so that
Hmm.
stimulates it. Um, and then it goes full circle. We need good sleep, but oftentimes in our society, people don't sleep very well. Like it's like everyone has insomnia. So cannabis can help promote
Right.
sleep, which then promotes the endocannabinoid system.
Right.
So that would be a better uh, chemical to
Hmm.
use other than synthetic pharmaceuticals, which don't really produce the right kind of sleep quality.
Right. Well, because we are in this phase of not talking about natural immunity and possibly even discounting it, and also possibly even our immune system itself, I do think our ECS system is somewhat under attack, by outside forces in a way. I would like to see more research on this. I believe it's really needed. You and I talked about maybe doing a research study on, users and see, how they do. It is happening though. Nature just published a piece about like sort of a test tube study where they introduced sort of this mix of cannabinoids and CBD, and they put it in the test tube with COVID, and it completely like obliterated it. Like cytokine production. It increased the macrophages. It was really interesting study.
Right. Yeah.
Now we
I'm
don't,
not surprised.
yeah, we don't have any. I haven't seen any human studies yet, but I think that's the precursor possibly to a human study, which it would be super exciting, guys, to see that come out. And I think that we are on the frontier of really digging into what the ECS system, the endocannabinoid system, can do for us, and really how best to culture that system so that we have natural defenses. So we don't always have to rely on biotech, but we can build our natural defense. And so essentially, we are making biotech for ourselves, but internally. And obviously, what we heard today was that medical cannabis could be a helper in that process, particularly if you're having issues, it's dysregulated, you need help, you need a supplement in essence of your your natural cannabinoids. And maybe
So,
we'll see research prove that out in time.
right. I agree. So it
Yeah.
becomes full circle. You have those people who we talked about the healthy lifestyle, but they just can't get the motivation to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
let's start with the cannabis end. So
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, people feel better. So then they will get out and go for a walk. And
Right.
then again we
Sure.
create this healthy circle lifestyle. Gives you that little extra burst of feeling better. So now you choose better, fruits and vegetables to eat and not at a fast food place.
Or you go out for a walk because you have less pain and you're
Right,
able to move, which then produces less pain and decrease
right. It
inflammation and so
feeds on
forth. Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Right. So
Well,
I would love there to be more research on natural immunity.
mhm.
I just it just amazes me with the healthcare system that why aren't we talking more about just healthy bodies and how to keep our bodies healthy?
Well,
I think
yeah, that's a
we,
whole
we've
nother
given
podcast.
up. We've given up on the ability of the
Yeah.
person to
Hmm.
make good choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sad.
Right. Well, maybe for the future that I think that's a worthwhile scientific debate. That's a worthwhile investigation, discussion that I believe we should be having, and also should be probably at the forefront of our medical and scientific community. Uh, I don't think the immune system's changed since we've been here. I mean, it's changed in the sense of we've evolved, but I don't think it's going away, and I hopefully we're not trying to replace it. So
Oh, right, right.
possibly a definite, awesome scientific discussion for the future and debate, and one I think a lot of medical practitioners and scientists would be really interested in having. So. I really appreciate having this discussion with you today, Dr. Anden. It's been super enlightening, always super informative. And as always, we're going to end with just curious, what impact would you like to have on humanity with the work that you're doing?
I like working with people one on one. I would like there to be more global education. So when I teach a patient and I'm instructing them on how their endocannabinoid system works and how they're using cannabis, I ask them to share that with their family members or friends who are also using cannabis. Uh, there's lots of information on the internet. Google. Anyone can Google things and learn more about the endocannabinoid system, but for
Mm-hmm.
some reason they don't. Maybe they're afraid of it. They don't know. But even experienced cannabis users, they don't know these words that we're saying. And
Right.
there's so much more to learn about it. So so I'm trying to impact sort of on a pyramid scheme.
Right. Right.
Where I see a certain number of people and then they spread the information in their method of communication because other people are most likely to get information from their friends and family.
Right.
And so I feel like spreading it that way, where the person says, "Hey, I think you're taking too much THC. This is
Mhm.
what I learned. We should back it down and maybe try some different types of products."
Right. Well, I'm all in to, yeah, pun intended, I'm all into helping you spread that word. I believe it's essential for humanity to know about this system. to utilize it, to capitalize on it. Even more important, our medical scientists and researchers to really continue to kind of dig into this system and how best to leverage it for the protection of humanity. So thank you very much. And we really appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll see you next time on the In. And we will be posting up some of those articles we talked about, both on the COVID front, the ECS system, and other ones that may be very pertinent and important for you to gain some knowledge and continue to spread the word. So thanks very much. And we'll see you next time on the In.